Hey, fourth graders. So today you are going to listen and read along with me, chapter 10 from Number the Stars. Let us open the casket. Ooh. So we know in chapter 9, there was a funeral at the house that they're staying in by the sea, Uncle Henrik's place. And Anne Marie knows that there is no great Aunt Bertie. I mean, she asked Uncle Henrik, he told her it's best that she doesn't know everything in order for her to be brave. So it looks like Lois Lowry is trying to clue in that Anne Marie is going to need to be brave. All right, let's get started with chapter 10. You are all here now, Uncle Henrik said, looking around the living room. I must go. Emery stood in the wide doorway, looking in from the hall. The baby slept now, and its mother looked tired. Her husband sat beside her, his arms crossed across his shoulders. His arm across her shoulders. Oh my gosh. The old man's head was still bent. Peter sat alone, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. It was clear that he was in deep thought. On the sofa, Ellen sat between her parents, one hand clasped tightly in her mother's. She looked up at Anne Marie but didn't smile. Anne Marie felt a surge of sadness. The bond of their friendship had not broken, but it was as if Ellen had moved now into a different world, the world of her own family and whatever lay ahead for them. The elderly bearded man looked up suddenly as Uncle Henrik prepared to go. God keep you safe, he said in a firm but quiet voice. Henrik nodded. God keep us all safe, he replied. Then he turned and left the room. A moment later, Anne Marie heard him leave the house. Mamma brought the teapot from the kitchen and a tray of cups. Anne Marie helped her pass the cups around. No one spoke. Anne Marie, Mamma whispered to her in the hall, you may go. You may go to bed if you want to. It is very late. Anne Marie shook her head, but she was tired. She could see that Ellen was too. Her friend's head was leaning on her mother's shoulder, and her eyes closed now and then. Finally, Anne Marie went to the empty rocking chair in the corner of the living room and curled there with her head against its soft, padded back. She dozed. She was startled from her half sleep by the sudden sweep of headlights through the sheer curtains and across the room as a car pulled up outside. The car doors slammed. Everyone in the room tensed, but no one spoke. She heard, as if in a reoccurring nightmare, the pounding on the door and the heavy, frighteningly familiar staccato of boots on the kitchen floor. The woman with the baby gasped and began to suddenly weep. We know this familiar. The male accented voice from the kitchen was loud. We have observed, he said, that an unusual number of people have gathered in this house tonight. What is the explanation? There has been a death, Mamma's voice replied calmly. It is always our custom to gather and pay our respects when a family member dies. I am sure you are familiar with our customs. One of the officers pushed Mamma ahead of him from the kitchen and entered the living room. There were others behind him. They filled the wide doorway. As always, their boots gleamed, their guns, their helmets, all of them gleamed in the candlelight. Anne Marie watched as the man's eyes moved around the room. He looked for a long time at the casket. Then he moved his gaze, focusing on each person in turn. When his eyes reached her, she looked back at him steadily. Who died? He asked harshly. No one answered. They watched Anne Marie as she realized that the officer was directing the question at her. Now she knew for certain what Uncle Henrik had meant when he had talked to her in the barn. To be brave came more easily If you knew nothing. She swallowed. My great Aunt Bertie, she lied in a firm voice. The officer moved forward suddenly across the room to the casket. He placed one gloved hand on its lid. Poor great Aunt Bertie, he said in a condescending voice. I do know your customs, he said, turning his gaze towards Mamma, who stood in the doorway. And I know it is the custom to pay one's respect by looking your loved one in the face. It seems odd to me that you have closed this coffin up so tightly. His hand was in his fist. His hand was in a fist, and he rubbed across the edge of the polished lid. Why is it not open? He demanded. Let us open it up and take a one last look at great Aunt Bertie. Anne Marie saw Peter cross the room, stiffen in his chair, lift his chin, and reach slowly with one hand toward his side. I think they're going to find out there's no great Aunt Bertie. Mama walked across the room directly to the casket, directly to the officer. You're right, she said. The doctor said it should be closed because Aunt Bertie died of typhus. And he said that there's a chance the germs would still be there, would still be dangerous. But what does he know? Only a country doctor and an old man at that. Surely typhus germs wouldn't linger in a dead person. And dear Aunt Bertie, I have been longing to see her face to kiss her goodbye. Of course we're going to open the casket. I'm glad you suggested. With the swift motion of the Nazi soldier slapped Mama across her face. She staggered backwards, and a white mark on her cheek darkened. You foolish woman, he spat. To think that we have any interest in seeing the body of your diseased aunt? Open it after we leave, he said. With one gloved thumb, he pressed the candle flame into darkness. The hot wax spattered the table. Put all these candles out, he said, or pull the curtains. Then he strode to the doorway and left the room. Motionless, silence, one hand on her cheek. Mama listened. They all listened as the uniformed men left the house. In a moment, they heard the car doors, the sound of the engine, and finally, they heard it drive away. Mama! Anne Marie cried. Her mother shook her head quickly and glanced at the open window covered by the sheer curtain. Anne Marie understood. There might still be soldiers outside, watching, listening. Peter stood and drew the dark curtains across the window. He relit the extinguished candle. Then he reached for the old Bible that had always been there on the mantle. He opened it quickly and said, I will read this psalm. His eyes turned to the page. He opened it at random and he began to read in a strong voice. Oh, praise Lord, how good it is to sing psalms to our God. How pleasant to praise him. The Lord is rebuilding Jerusalem. He gathers in the scattered sons of Israel. It is he who heals the broken in spirit and binds up their wounds. He who numbers the stars one by one. Finally, we find out what numbers the stars are. The broken spirits. He heals the broken spirits, and binds up their wounds. He who numbers the stars one by one. Mama sat down and listened. Gradually, they each began to relax. Anne Marie could see the old man across the room moving his lips as Peter read. He knew the ancient song by heart. Anne Marie did it. The words were unfamiliar to her, and she tried to listen, tried to understand, tried to forget the war and the Nazis, try not to cry, try to be brave. The night breeze moved through the dark curtains at the open windows. Outside, she knew the sky was speckled with stars. How could anyone number them one by one? As the psalm said, there were too many. The sky was too big. Ellen had said that her mother was frightened of the ocean, that it was too cold and too big. The sky, too. The sky was too, thought Anne Marie. The whole world was too cold, too big, and too cruel. Peter read on in his firm voice, though it was clear he was tired. The long minutes passed. They seemed hours. Finally, still reading, he moved quietly to the window. He closed the Bible and listened to the quiet night. Then he looked around the room. Now, he said, it is time. First, he closed the windows. Then, he went to the casket and opened the lid. Wow. A lot just happened in chapter 10. Get ready. Chapter 11 is going to be insane too. Are they really going to get through it? Okay, get ready for chapter 11.